Welcome, I'm Dr. Al Frech. We're here at Montclair State University, and we are here today with Doreen Finkle. Doreen is the CEO and founder of Campusteaparties.com, and Doreen has a story to tell, and I think we're all going to enjoy it. So Doreen, let me jump right in here. Welcome today. Welcome to be here.
Thank you for having me.
What did you notice, either in your own education or as you started to visit campuses, that you had a felt need for this effort to develop campus tea parties and to talk to students and organize students? What made you decide to do that?
Well, I started the project a little over 2 years ago, and I saw this as a need because with all of my educational background that I have, I sat through the education courses, and I basically realized that a lot of the courses offered at the university level, the professors choose to indoctrinate rather than educate, and that's why you have so many youngsters coming out thinking just one way or another. Mm-hmm. And when the project was started 2 years ago, I had gone down to Rutgers University, and I had met with the college Republicans there, and this was only about, maybe I was 2 months with the Marshtown Tea Party. And I had done that because the Marshtown Tea Party, and like much of the Tea Party, there was no youth involved. And so I said, you got to get the youth on board with this. Mm-hmm. And so I had gone down to Rutgers, and it was about 70 students there that night. And they welcomed me, and the next thing you know, out of their mouth, they were chanting, "We want a tea party." And then it said, "We want a campus tea."
Right.
It developed.
Right. Right.
And lo and behold, they had wanted it within 3 weeks. And I said, gee, I said, this is going to be impossible. I mean, Rutgers is one of the most left-leaning campuses. And so I took a look at it, and I brought it back to the Marshtown Tea Party. I said, these kids want you to come down there in 3 weeks. I said, you don't even have speakers. Mm-hmm. And so the leader of the group had said, well, you have to do what you can do now. Mm-hmm. And I talked to the kids within those 3 weeks, and 2 weeks went by, nothing. And then they called me and said that the college Democrats were offering Bill Clinton mm-hmm. the same day, mm-hmm. and to come down and speak. And they wanted to counter us. And I said, well, what do you mean counter us? We don't even have anything together.
There's nothing to counter.
Right. So, and I said, how much is Bill Clinton getting paid? And they said, oh, probably $100,000. Like, whoa. You know, and I'm wondering, where do they get the money from?
Right. Where's that coming from?
And until about a week before, the youngsters called me and said, listen, we have James O'Keefe coming down for us, so we want to do this. So it was like a savior.
Just explain who James O'Keefe is for people who are not familiar with James O'Keefe.
James O'Keefe is with Project Veritas, and he's also a fellow who had exposed Acorn, mm-hmm. and a couple other, he has a couple other projects out there, but Acorn was one of the biggest ones that he had done.
Was that the one with the pimps and prostitutes that he did, the
yes.
undercover one? Okay.
Yes, the pimps and prostitutes. So anyhow, I said, wow, I said, I'm going to need a star. Mm-hmm. And so that day came, and the college Republicans at the time had advertised it and done a number of things. And that day came, and we had about 50 students down there. Mm-hmm. And the college Democrats, they didn't have much more for Bill Clinton. And I said to them, I said, you know, we only have 50 students out of a university that has 24,000. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, it's got to be something wrong mm-hmm. here. And the students brought me into a conference room at the time, and James O'Keefe sat me down, and he said, I'm going to give you a lesson.
This was a short course.
This was the short crash course. And boy, did he give me a lesson. I had said to him, I said, wow, you're educating me, and it really should be the other way around.
What was one thing that he told you that really struck you?
One thing he told me that really struck me was the fact that at the time they were having an issue with a fast food restaurant on their campus getting kicked off. I don't remember the name of it, and but this fast food restaurant sort of played into the African community and made it seem as though, well, you know, Africans eat French fries and chicken nuggets and all this, and it was almost insulting to them. So what James O'Keefe did is he turned around and told all the college Republicans, well, okay, if they want to kick this restaurant off campus, then we're going to attack the people who make up the nutritional guidelines. And one of the things he said was, let's boycott the Lucky Charms cereal, because he goes, oh, well, you're going to offend Irish people. So, so they had started a huge boycott on basically cereals, but it was mostly Lucky Charms.
Right.
And he spread it out through Facebook, and he started a whole thing down there, and nothing ever came of it, and the fast food restaurant got to stay, and and the whole thing sort of resolved itself.
So he took their own ploy and turned it around on them, and exaggerated this whole discriminatory piece to make a point.
Yes. And did it work? Yes.
Right.
So then he said, well, let's have you back, and we'll to work with us, and we'll do some training. And then at that time, that was the only campus that I was on. And I had said, gee, well, let's look to see how the Republicans are doing in general on campus, or any conservative group. And I went to the drawing board, and I found out that in New Jersey, the Republican clubs are only about 17. And in New Jersey, we have over 100 campuses.
So these are college Republican clubs?
Yes.
Okay.
And we took a look at the conservative groups on campus, and it turns out that there are studies done by David Horowitz, and he has gone on to say that the left-wing groups outnumber the conservative groups on campus 3 to 1.
Now, my understanding, and I think it's widely held, that the university has become a bastion of liberal thought thinking, and therefore there's a lot of support for groups, for student groups, that espouse the leftist philosophy, whereby the conservative group students, Republicans, conservative Republicans, libertarians, will not get that kind of support administratively, fund-wise, et cetera. Did you find that?
Absolutely. And so in doing so, I had created a pitching fund, I call it, from Campusteaparties.com. And by the way, Campusteaparties.com is a 501c3. And we're eligible to accept funds for conservative groups on campus, so that when they need something like a speaker, or they want to develop and grow, they can.
But Doreen, just tell us what a pitching fund is. People might not know
I
that.
call it a pitching fund. It's a term that we use with the students.
Okay.
They call me and say if they need money, then
They
it
pitch
depends
in?
on what it is. No, it depends on what it is.
Right.
Of course, if it's over a certain amount,
Right.
you're going to get the no. But if it's stuff for like pizza and their daily maintenance, or their weekly maintenance, and if they call for something like that, then they can certainly have some money.
So it's like a pitching in,
Like a maintenance thing for them.
Okay.
But, go ahead.
Well, we're just wondering, I think people might be interested in knowing when Rutgers then was the first campus, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So now when you decided to move on to other campuses, what was your plan, and did you learn along the way on how to enter into a campus and negotiate the system?
Yes, I did. Well, actually, I shouldn't say totally learned along the way, because I'm also an education major, so I do have some inroads. But the areas in which we learned, like for example, CCM, okay, I used a contact there, and I had asked them to set up a table for us so we can recruit a conservative group over there. And this was an interesting case because the fella had applied for a permit for us to do that.
The student?
The student did, yes, and he had wanted to be a part of a Republican club, and he got the permit. And so one day he said, let's all go down there, we'll put the table out and recruit students. And we did, we went there, and he had told me that he had to go to work. So I said, okay, you can go, and I'll just sit here, and whoever signs up, signs up. And lo and behold, the police showed up, and showed up with handcuffs. And yes, and they had said, what are you doing here? I said, oh, well, I'm recruiting for a conservative group on campus. And they said, well, do you have a permit? And I said, well, yes, we have permission from the Student Government Association. And they said, well, where's your permit? And I said, well, I don't have it. And the fella went and took the handcuffs. And he said, well, I'm going to have to handcuff you. And I said, well, let me make a phone call, because surely this is some mistake. And he said, well, no, there's no mistake. And I said, well, sure, there is a mistake, because I know the student who had done this. And luckily, when I made that phone call, the student was there. He picked up the phone. And I said, see, the student is on the phone for me. And I said, you have to listen to what the student's saying. And the police did. And then, by then, a couple of policemen were there. And, yeah, and they were waiting for an answer from the president of the college on this to call them off or arrest me.
Right.
And so they had called the president of the college, who had made some phone calls, and they said, you know, you have to let this lady go. And they had backed off. But by the end of that day, I said, gee, you know, I said, I don't even know if I should stay here anymore. But
a little exhausting. And,
Right. And so I said, and after all the students were watching this at that time. Go ahead.
So when you go to a campus now, do you work through students? Do you have to go to administration if you want to get a room or something like that? How do you do it, and has it become easier to get started on a campus now?
At this point, yes, it's gotten easier to get started on a campus, but initially, no, because I didn't have that contact. And if you go through the front door on a college campus, you won't get anywhere. So if you can use social media, that might get you so far. But once you get the contact on a campus, then they can help you with other campuses, and they can help you also with the students on that particular campus.
So a contact would be, who might be a contact on a campus that you've used?
A professor or a student.
Okay.
Either or.
Okay. So somebody inside the system.
Yes.
That can advocate for you or for the organization of students.
Yes.
Okay.
and we have found that inroad. And right now, I'm also the New Jersey State Tea Party student recruit for the Tea Party Patriots.
Uh-huh.
And we have the inroad now. And so it's much easier for me now to go on a campus and recruit students. And in New Jersey, we have quite a number right now, probably about 300 or 400. And
starting from those 50 students at Rutgers and
yes, and
building.
and there was also an incident that I'd like to mention. After I started at Rutgers, we had tried to get onto Montclair, which is here, and we had made that mistake of trying to go through the front door. And what the students were looking at, they had asked me if I put an ad in the paper, and I said, well, I was trying to. And I had called here to place an ad. It was for Tea Party students. And the college over here was giving us a hard time.
About placing the ad?
Yes. And they said, well, we don't want any information that's too controversial in our newspaper. And so I said, well, how is it controversial if you're just placing an ad in a newspaper just to recruit for a conservative group? And they said, well, this starts trouble on our campus. And so
so placing an ad to ask students to come to a Tea Party type meeting was just too controversial.
It was too controversial.
And scared the administration, it sounds like.
Yes. And so about 3 or 4 weeks went by, and I said to the students I said, this isn't going anywhere. I said, this is a free speech issue here. And again, the more educated students at the time said, well, we're going to have to help you call fire, or you're going to have to do something. And so,
and fire, just tell people what fire is so they know.
Yes. Fire is an organization that advocates for free speech on campus, and that's what they do. They have a lot of lawyers, and I know Montclair has been in trouble with fire numerous times. And if you type up fire on the internet, it will come up with their website.
So they have a staff of attorneys who volunteer to come out and protect students' rights for free speech, not only individual but organizations, student organizations, that they should be able to not be discriminated against on the campus by the college administration. Is that basically it?
Right. And at the time, the student from Rutgers had called fire for us, and lo and behold, the ad went through. Okay, and it was placed in the newspaper, but then about 3 or 4 weeks later, the fellow from the Montclarian calls me and said, well, you know, we noticed that a lot of the newspapers that you had your ad in were either confiscated or torn up by somebody. So I said, well, who would have done this? And they said, well, probably a left-leaning group here. So I didn't give up at that time.
So what did they say? So what was the upshot of that? Did they say, well, we don't want you to place any more ads, or just informing you of what was happening?
They were just informing me of what was happening. And so at that time, I said, well, we're going to try something else, okay? And I went through the social networks, Facebook and whatever, and I saw a fella on there, and he looked like a student. And he said he was at Montclair State University, and I said I wanted to start a conservative group here. So he says, well, come down and we'll talk. And so I came down, I met him in the student center here, and he happened to be a professor. And I was a little scared at the time. I said, gee, this guy's
Be intimidating?
Yes, he was going to make mincemeat out of me. And he started laughing. And he was smiling the whole time, and he says, "You want to start either a Republican or conservative group?" I said, "Yes." And he said, he's a professor of political science here. And so he says, "Well, I will help you out." He whispered it. He said, "Well, I will help you out," like that.
Some unexpected help along the way, right?
Yes, and I said, "Oh, you're conservative," and he smiled and said, "Yes." And shh.
Yes, right. Typical for many college campuses. If you're a conservative faculty member, you have to be undercover.
Right, and I often call it the secret society of professors. And so he said, "Okay, well, I'm going to go through my student groups here, and we're going to see what we can do." And so this fellow started helping me. He was coming to Tea Party meetings and different things. And then he said, "Hey, Doreen, I got a couple students now." Okay. And I said, "Well, what do they want to do? Do they want to organize officially? They want to do unofficial?" I said, "No, come down and we'll talk." So I came down one day, and he said, "Well, they wanted to start as a Republican club." And I said, "Well, we'll get them set up as a Republican club." And then he said, "Let me talk to them first, then we'll have you back again." And the second time we came around, I had Dan Haggerty with me, and we sat down in the lunchroom, and we were talking about the charter. And the professor pulls me inside. He says, "We're going to have to go to the SGA." And so he pulled me down to the SGA and to get the chartering information. And the woman there does one of these, and she says, "Come over here," like this. And she says to me, she said, "Bill Ayers is coming to the campus." And I said, "Yeah." I said, "This is like another one." And so I went over, I said, "When?" She goes, "Oh, in 3 days." I'm like, wow, another 3-day thing. I was bad enough I had to do a tea party within 3 weeks,
Right.
never mind 3 days to do something here.
So you then learned of this event as you were really trying to start an organization on campus.
Yes.
You learned of this event as a tip, almost
As
like
a
a tip. Right.
Yes. And my professor friend had left, and I had called over a colleague, Dan, and told him about it. And he was also very much in shock, and had a big smile on his face. And I was looking at, what are we going to do? So him and I got to the drawing board and called his Tea Party friends, and I called mine, and lo and behold, it was all over the state that Bill Ayers was coming.
This was almost like your first event, even before you were fully organized on Montclair
Yes.
State campus.
Yes. So then we had about 70 Tea Party there, and we had an unfortunate incident happen that night. It was between actually 2 professors, and the college about a week or 2 later said, "Well, we think you're partly responsible for this." And I said, "How?" And he said, "Well, you wanted to start up a Republican club." And I said, "Yeah, but how is that being responsible for whatever happened?" And so, well, they said, "Well, if you haven't been there, none of this would have happened."
All right, if you don't exist, then there wouldn't be any problems, so.
Right. So I looked at this again. I said, this is crazy. I said this left organization here is just crazy on the campus.
So you started to see what you were up against.
Pattern.
Right, yeah, pattern.
Complete pattern. And the students at the time were sort of feeling a pinch, and they were saying, "Well, now we have a bad name upon us," because everybody seems to blame the Republican Party. And so we looked at it again. I said, "Well, whatever you guys want to do at this point."
But they were feeling a little intimidated?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So the fella says to me, "Well, we have a lot of libertarians in the club." And so I said, well, then go ahead with that. By that time, it was just like, go ahead, okay? And so they started with the Libertarian Club, and we only started with about 15 students. And to this day, the club here at Montclair has probably about 120 right now.
Wow.
Right.
Wow, very
Right.
nice, very nice.
Go ahead.
Doreen, I wanted to get into a little flavor of what the students say to you. What do they say to you about what they're experiencing on campus and why they're interested in a Republican, conservative, Tea Party organizations? What do you hear from them?
That's a great question, by the way, and I'll tell you why. Because when I go visit their groups, they ask me questions that they wouldn't even ask an administrator because they know the answer. It's pretty much questions that deal with fighting the left on campus and dealing with a particular professor. I could remember another incident we had at Rutgers. A particular student had placed something in the Rutgers newspaper down there stating his case that why we should not have affirmative action laws. And so he came off as an anti-affirmative action. And so somebody in administration had found out about that and wanted to force him to take a course in diversity.
So take a course in diversity because you were critical of affirmative action.
Yes.
And you needed diverse training, diversity
Yes.
training.
Yes. And a student will often tell me that they sometimes have trouble with a professor, particularly in the humanities area, where a professor is spewing off information about a particular candidate, you know, who they favor, and if a student disagrees with them, then the student basically has no recourse to develop it.
So, but basically students are asking for some support, some help, some strategies on how to level the playing field.
Yes.
And how to overcome the barriers that seem to be presented in their way as far as organizing and doing the same things that other students who are more on the left are able to do with less problems. Now let me just ask you one other question here, and that is, if you were to summarize the mission of the Tea Parties, Campusteaparties.com, what is the mission briefly in a sentence or so?
The mission of Campusteaparties.com is this, to recruit, of course, Tea Party and conservative students, and to promote conservative values on campus, and also to educate students and to write educational curriculum that is focused on what we call teaching for autonomy and the Constitution, rather than this, what's being offered right now, which is this collective curriculum, I call it. Some call it the social justice education.
So this is like an alternative constitutional curriculum to give students an option, another option,
Right.
to follow, right?
Right.
Okay. Now,
Okay.
Doreen, first of all, we're running out of time, all right?
Right.
Unfortunately, but I think a lot of people will be inspired by your courage, your persistence, your ability to overcome some of the institutional barriers. And I want to thank you for coming here today, and good luck. And again, what is the it's Campus Tea Parties? Give that.
Yes, you can find more information about our project at campusteaparties.com. That's HTTP campusteaparties.com.
And folks, thanks very much for tuning in today. This is very inspiring. Please take a look at campusteaparties.com and visit, get in touch with Doreen, and start your organization. Thank you, Doreen.
And thank you.